Huddersfield, 1961. A town of mill chimneys and tight-knit streets where a generation was finding its voice. And among them, a young boy with a laugh as quick as his feet, destined not just for rugby glory, but to become a symbol of a community's resilience and pride. Henderson Gill's story begins here in the heart of a Windrush family where discipline and dreams collided. A boy caught between worlds, Barbadian riddles at the kitchen table, Yorkshire grit on the pitch, and the echoing chants of skinheads on the streets he called home. This was a Huddersfield of contradictions, a place where you learn to stand tall, whether facing racial taunts or dancing through tackles, where venues like Venn Street became sanctuaries and football trials with Bobby Campbell couldn't shake his love for rugby's raw brotherhood. Before Wigan fame, before the boogie that stunned Australia, there was a son of stonemasons and seamstresses, a boy who carried his father's work ethic and his mother's quiet strength onto every field, every fight, every victory. This is Henderson Gill, not just a try-scoring legend, but the Huddersfield lad who never forgot where he came from. Join us as he revisits the streets, the struggles, and the soul that shaped him.
Growing up in the 60s and the 70s, it was different. It was a total different as it is today. It was hard for us. I grew up in the times where there was all the skinheads, the suede heads and things like that. So there was still a bit of racial tensions going around in the town. Well, yeah, growing up was constantly battling all the time. There was certain places that we couldn't go. We had to go like in groups of 2s and 3s because, for the fear of people wanting to jump us, especially when you're going into the parks and things like that. There was always gangs and people, always wanting to engage us. So, we had to stand our own ground. So basically, I learned from early that the only way to get through it was to stand on your own two feet and battle. Well, in the 60s, it was like this. We was always getting name calls, called funny names like, people telling us, get back on your jam jar, what did your mother used to do when she took you shopping? Lick your lips and slap you on the window, We got the nigger taunts as well, We got the black this and black that, It was just constant. That was in the later part for the 60s for me. The 70s was pretty much the same, and I encountered the same thing, maybe not as bad, in the 80s, but it was still there, which to me, from the 60s when growing up right to the 70s and then in the 80s, and it's still there, and as we all know, it's still present today, it's still going on. Right, well, my parents came here, I believe my dad came round about 1958, it would have been 1958, round about that time, which was regarded as the Windrush generation. And to be of a Windrush generation, you had to have come here between 1948 and it ended 1971. To be part of that Windrush generation, which my father came in that period. We'll always remember it because he left his wife and my eldest sister at the time back in Barbados to come here and start a new life. So he came over. Yes, they told me how they came over on the boats. Unfortunately, the Windrush was actually a cruiser ship. That's what it was. It was a cruiser ship. The Nazis took it. Actually, they took it and seized it, because it was an old, and used it for transporting troops. And that's where it ended up in the West Indies, the Caribbean. I think it was Jamaica first, where it started there, and then it started transporting people all the way over to England. And I think it was Essex, the Essex docks. I think it's Tilbury or something like that. That was the dock where it actually docked and took them to. So it was down London, and that's how it came about. But I think when my dad actually came here now, it was another ship. I can't remember the name of it, but I think might have been Liverpool or somewhere where that ship actually docked. So I think they took the Windrush out of service by that time, because it was renamed Empire Windrush. I always remember that name. And that's the main thing of it. So to be part of the Windrush generation, you had to have come here between 1948 and 71, and that was it. So he came over anyway. When he got here, he'd left Barbados. He was a stonemason by trade. He came over, and he went in the Air Force as well. You know, where he was working. He then became a mechanic. He studied and things, and he became a real qualified mechanic, which he was doing things like that, working for builders and things like that. And he just carried on until he'd saved enough money to send for his wife and his firstborn child. And then it was awkward because when he came here at that time, you know, getting properties and things like that, you couldn't get them, you know. So there was other people that had came before him on the Windrush, right? And what the West Indian people used to do, right? Certain ones would have a house, and once you came over, they'd put you up until you could get your own premises and things like that. And that's what they did. That's how hard it was. They just couldn't go out there and get their own properties. So it was really hard when he first came over. But, you know, it took him all of 12 months, 18 months to find his feet with a job, get a job and everything. And then he brought his wife over, set up shop, and then he actually got his own property, his own house. Yes, it was hard for him to get a job because, you know, every other job you wanted, you had to be a qualified or something like that. In that time, there wasn't probably a lot in the stone, you know, for a stonemason by trade or thing. It wasn't like in abundance like it is today. You know, they're all dying arse to find them. But most of the people that came over in the Windrush generation, they sought and found jobs in public transport up and down the country, because that was the easiest thing for them to do, you know, driving the buses, you know, the trains and various things like that. And that's what they had to do, you know, even road sweeping, you know, jobs that a lot of people didn't want to do, you know, and we ended up having to do those jobs because that was the only way for them to get ahead. You know, there was that many promises as well. They promised, oh, come to England, everything, you'll be looked after and things like that. But what they actually found when they actually got here, you know, the money wasn't, the streets weren't paved with gold like they said it was. They had to struggle to get there. And when they got here, it was a case of they couldn't just go back home because they couldn't raise the money to get the passage back anyway. So it's like they were stuck. So many of them had to stay, and unfortunately there was a lot of them that never actually got back to their islands after they came as well, you know, because you got to remember they came from Jamaica, Trinidad, Grenada, Barbados, all over, you know, all over the Caribbean they came from. And that was the scenario, you know. They just, you know, there was a lot of taxes over here as well, you know. It was a lot higher cost of living, you know, to be in, and basically they're in a foreign country. They don't know anybody, you know. Compared to the little West Indies islands, you know, you've got big cities that are bigger than the actual island, you know, with population as well. So it was a really rough time for them, you know, coming over. Well, when they came, I always remember me mum and dad talking to me about things like that, and they found it hard. They got a lot of stick from everybody, and basically, if any West Indian person were back in those times, you could understand there was always close with like the Polish and the Irish. The Irish, right? They were the ones that actually got on really great with us, at that time. I remember growing up with Irish families and a couple of Polish families as well. And, we used to go everywhere together. We got on great. Whereas I went to school and everything else, and I was just getting taunts all the time. So us and the Irish were constantly battling, against all the other elements, and that's what it was like, because the Irish used to get a load of stick as well, and the Poles. So that we all had it, but like we got the brunt of it. So, we kind of stuck together and we sorted it out, and, we went to places together, as a unit. And so constantly we were battling through that era time. Well, yes, my dad, he was a cricketer. He loved the sport so much. And what he did when he came over, he actually got a team going in the community as well, with everybody from, there was all because you could guarantee anyone that came from the West Indies was a cricketer, so they had them all. And basically what he did, he formed a Caribbean team, like the West Indian team of Yorkshire or something, on that line. And they did really well, and he was a batsman himself, so he played. And there was certain players that I distinctly remember. Stanley Innes used to play in that team as well, and there was a lot of Basil, Mr. Hall. There's a lot of these old timers that I knew, that I used to see around my dad. We used to go visit him, because that's what we used to do. On Sundays we'd go out on the cricket, and he'd take us out and we'd go where they were playing. So and it was a family outing as well. So it was actively good, because we got a day out with my dad, all the family. We sit up the night, my mum's making the sandwiches, and we got a packed lunch and everything, and we take it, fried chicken, everything, and we go to these games, and that's what it was like. Late 60s, as my dad was playing cricket, and 70s and all them, the community, the West Indian community, there was a tight knit, because we had to be, they suffered abuse in that time. I mean, the most is, it's like when they first come, they had to suffer it all, and it was all there. It was terrible for them. So they had to do something to make sure that they was okay. And everything they did it with resistance. So getting a cricket team going and things like that, it made them feel like they were back home, because those were the things that they did back home. They had their fun playing cricket, the sport that they loved. And that's what they actually did, and that's what it actually brought to them, as well as having the families. The main thing, the strength of them was the families. Grew up tight-knit family, and that's how we grew up, because like we grew up together and we were close. We used to go out and visit friends, and it was a family thing. And it continued with that, right, all the way up until the fact when we got of age, where we could go our own separate ways. I think the black community today is very split. It's segregated. It seems to me a bit like every man for himself. They're not as tight knit families. I see families, they're not exactly as close as what I felt when I grew up. Because my family was really close. And people I knew, their families were close, and it's a bit different now. There's less opportunities available for them, even though we've moved on in time. It's hard for them. I look at the things that in the community as well. It's like everything's sky high prices. you know, things like that. Everything towards the younger generation now is harder. They can't, the things that we could get and what we did when I was a boy, you know, we didn't have to have money to have fun. That's the biggest noticeable thing that I look on today. You know, kids of today, they've got a lot more money than what we had when we were their ages, but they don't seem to be as happy. So I wouldn't swap my upbringing for the world to have an upbringing now. I would always go back to the way I was brought up and how we lived then. I'd always go there every single time. It wouldn't even be a debate because it's a no-brainer. Education that I went through in school was, to me, basically, I thought it was limited, right? The things we did, you know, especially history. You know, all the history that I remember was doing was like British history. But I never learned about my own culture or things that went on or my heritage, anything like that. It was all pretty cut, and it was one thing or the other. So it was pretty just plain. So, but as I've grown older and realised things and learned more things, you know, like the originations and things, where we originated from and things like that, and the cultures that was followed, you know, even today's standards, they're still finding stuff out that's been like in an archive, like they've locked. So it's like a hidden thing, you know. We've had a hidden identity, and now things are coming out more. But basically, they're trying to import more into schools now, which is rightly so. You know, we never learned about Windrush or anything like that at school. We were never told about it, even though it happened in that time frame. Nothing was said. They never said that we'd come over here from the islands or nothing. Nothing like that was ever taught in schools, right? And it should be, because it's a vital piece of information about Caribbean cultured kids. You know, that's what happened. That's how their parents was first to come here. And if you're going to teach us anything else, well, you need to teach us about ourselves as well. So really, now, that's why I think we celebrate Windrush every year now. I think June the 22nd is Windrush Day, right? So every year, June the 22nd, that's where we celebrate the Windrush Day, which is a good thing. Then they've got Black History Month as well. So basically, you know, things are moving slowly but surely. And that's how it's needed to be. But like I said, it was a big difference in the earlys when I went to school. You know, things that I should have learned in school, I didn't, because it wasn't in their curriculum, as they say. Nowadays, you know, people are more outspoken, and basically they can, you know, actually put things to paper. They read about things now. We've got the internet and things like that, which is a world of information. You can find out all kind of things on the internet now, which is good. So we've got a more vivid idea of what can be achieved by sources, which we never had then. So that's the highs and the lows of information and learning when I was at school. You know, I'd rather be today now because I've got an access to everything that I need. You know, we've even got it on as mobile phones now. So, you know, we're on the go 24 hours a day. We can source information. Well, my identity of today is still the same. One, I'm a black male. I'll always be a black male. That will never ever change. And my identity, I carry the identity of my parents, which is the strongest thing that I can remember, right? I tried to take values from my parents, right? Things that I've done, I'm not saying all of them came from my parents, but the majority of the good things definitely came from my parents, right? The values that I've grown up from them, I've kept them. Obviously, it's mixed match. You know, you think as you're an adult, you can do whatever you want and you say what you want, you've got your own views. But basically, there's always like an angel sat on my shoulder. If I decide to go the wrong road, that I'm getting pointed back onto the right road. And that's what it is, you know. You live and you learn, you remember things. You know, the difference is, as I was growing up, I'd noticed parents never actually told us. My parents seemed to talk to me in riddles, and you had to work out what they actually meant. They had little phrases and things like that that we had to learn from. They'd never lay it out to us like today. Parents tell you and they give you a big explanation. It wasn't like that with my parents. They'd tell us like in a form of a riddles, and we'd have to work it out and use his brain. And that's why we were more aware of certain things and can see things, right? And we learned from it, because it wasn't just, we wasn't hand fed, you know. I always remember as well, my mother always telling us, and mum and dad tell us, like, we were born with a golden spoon in his mouth and we just didn't realise it. You know, things like that, you know, and it's true. Well, in normal circumstances, right, because my parents resided here, I would have to say British, and that's on the period. But the fact is, if I chose, I had the choice. I could be a Barbadian national if I wanted, because that's what my heritage has given to me, right? I can opt for that if I chose it. But because I've resided here all the time, you know, I'd have to say British. But like I said, you know, I've never knocked back, because as far as I'm right, I'm Bajan descendant. And that's as simple as that. You know, they can look at it any which way they want. You know, if I had the flag, you know, it's the Bajan flag and a British flag, you know, it would have to be a combined thing. Not to mention, because due to the sports that I did as well, you know, I've got the like dual heritage, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I do establish and acknowledge the British part as well, basically, because, you know, being here as well, you know, the opportunities of living in England is a lot different to living in the West Indies. You know, it's a lot harder for you, and you know, things, yeah, it's a lot harder for you being, you know, living in the West Indies. You haven't got the opportunities and things available to you as what you would have here. So basically it's like a haven. Well, the one that stands up in my mind all the time. My mother used to always tell me, and I could always say that. And basically, she's telling me, if you think you're too smart, the more the monkey climb the tree, the more you expose the ass. And that's the one. You know, explaining it. It tells you, you know. So you carry on. You keep exposing yourself. You know, and that's the riddles we were taught to in, and you had to work them out. And you know, as you got older, you think, wow, I know what that means, you know, and, you know, telling me thinking I'm too smart for my own good and things like that, you know, and that was it. You know, sometimes, you know, if you get half, laugh, you know, things like that, you know, and you've just had to work them out yourself, you know, but as you get older, all those things come back to haunt you, because you always remember them. Well, back in the 80s, Venn Street came along when we got of age. We could go there because it was one of the elder clubs and things like that, and you had to be a certain age before you could go there. I was introduced, it lucky for me, I was playing around with sound systems and things like that, and eventually, as my time came, Venn Street came along, and fortunately I took over from the previous DJ who was there. Everest, his name was, well, we call him Spider, right? He was the man running the sound system, and I actually took over from him and became the resident DJ, playing the sounds and everything. And when I got in there, I kind of changed the music there for the younger generation of my age group, because Venn Street played a lot of for the older generation, which was normal and never really catered for my age group at that time. So I tend to change the trend little every now and again. I kept bringing in something until I changed it, until they started having playing the big sounds. You know, they brought sounds from London, Birmingham, Nottingham, Manchester, you know, and I played against all those sounds, you know. You know, your Jabarans, your Presidents, your Quaker City, your Sir Coxon, Fat Man Hi-Fi, the Enforcer, you know, all those sounds. I was a resident DJ and I played against them. So that was the era for me and Venn Street, and it was a big thing for the town because we had artists coming into the town as well, you know, like Matumbi, you know, musical youth before they even became famous and things like that. You know, we had Dillinger, Rankin Toyin, you know, Wailing Souls, you know, various artists, Eka Mouse, you know, Dennis Brown, Gregory Isaacs. They all came to Venn Street, and it was a part of the calendar, you know, the Huddersfield dynasty, you know. Yes, Venn Street wasn't just a nightclub. It was a meeting point for all folks from all areas that came into the town. You know, we had a rapport with people from out of town. Huddersfield was always like the central place. People wanted to come to Venn Street because it was so famous. So people came, right, and, you know, struck a lot of friends from all over the globe, and they came, we met up and things, and, you know, these people came back, not just for the ones, for the artists. They came back time and time again, and it really opened up Huddersfield. You know, it was a really big thing going to Venn Street, and it was a vital part of the history of Huddersfield regarding West Indian people and people of the Caribbean. Yes, well, Venn Street catered for everything. If you had a funeral, a wedding, anything that you want to do, it was available there because it was a big place. So everybody wanted to use the venue, and you could guarantee a really good turnout for any event held at Venn Street. That was the main part of it as well. So, and it just wasn't just for like West Indian people origin as well. Venn Street catered for others as well, because I remember there was DJs like Sasha before he got world famous, you know. They even had the time where they had punk rockers, you know, and things like that came to Venn Street and used the venue. So it catered for all kinds of music religiously. Well, I think when Venn Street closed, it was a big loss to the town. There was nowhere to go, you know, people there. You know, it sent a lot of music underground. You had a lot of blues opening up and things like that. There was another venue what they tried to use, but it wasn't as successful, which was Friendly and Trade. That was one of the other places. We had the club up at Paddock, Arawak, and things like that. But it never commanded the same as Venn Street. Venn Street was a different type of place, and out of all of them, it was the most. It will be the most remembered of them all. Yes, a lot of people liked the Arawak. It was quieter. You know, you had a different types of clientele that went up Paddock rather than Venn Street, but also you had the Montego as well. Black Star it was known in those days, which was on Chapel Hill as well. So there was a couple of places where people went, but it wasn't your Venn Street. Yeah, Mr. Babs was a significant figure. He had his troubled times running the club, as did Derek Johnson. But Mr. Babs, you'll always remember Mr. Babs. You know, that famous laugh that he always used to have. And then there was Arnold Johnson as well. He was the other one as well. Great bloke. You know, they were both of them were really nice piece. Really decent people. You know, I got on great with them both. Mr. Babs, you know, always, and Mr. Johnson always called me Jag Gill. I always remember that, Mr. Johnson. And it was really nice, you know, they were straight. What you saw was what you got, basically. And they'll always, as long as I remember Venn Street, I will always remember those people. It's as simple as that. Well, Black Star was always the team that was always going, and it was made up of basically Caribbean players to form their own league, and they were successful, but it was always the same thing with the Black Stars: ill discipline. That's the one thing that always let down those sides, the discipline. They were really fiery. Not to mention they was up against it as well, because, like I said, once you saw a team full of blacks, you could guarantee there was going to be something there. Referees used to cheat and rotten as well. Make some bad decisions, and like any other footballer, were passionate about the sport. So passion took over, and sometimes you have that rush of blood to the head, and that's when the ill discipline started coming out. So, and they really suffered for it. Yeah, well, basically, you go to Wooldale and places like that out in the country, Home Firth, any ties, family tires and Upper Thurston and Upper Thongs, a bridge and places like that. Well, we're a minority up there, so people didn't know how to take us. It was like, who were there? There wasn't places that was used to seeing a lot of black faces, understandably, and basically it was hard. We got taunts just like everybody else. Everywhere we went, we got taunted. That's what it was like in the 70s for me, playing football, and the same thing in the rugby. I got it all the time. Everywhere we went, you'd always get somebody that would cause hassle for us, and it's like we always had to put up and shut up at that time. It was awful. I know what it was like. I've always been on the receiving end of it, but it was a strict policy, sticks and stones will break my bones, but calling me names won't hurt me, I think the treatment that I received and other sportsmen like myself received, I basically put it down to this. They saw something in us that they didn't like, and basically they knew we were good. So what they wanted to do was bring us down to their level, put us off the game. Me, myself, I didn't let things like that get to me. It just made me more up to get up to them and do even better. It made me want to do better, right? And let them eat the words and things like that. And that's exactly as I played, when I played the game. I just made sure that whoever I was playing against, I was going to make them look fool, right? And I was going to have the upper hand, and that was my way of getting around it. I'd scored a goal, I'd scored a try. Whatever it took, that's what I did. Unfortunately, there's some players that probably was not as strong-willed and strong-minded as me, and it put them off the game. And I feel it for them as well, because everybody handles things a different way. I was really strong-minded, so I handled it okay. So it didn't really get to me. And at the end of the day, the best result is when you win. But there again, you've got to remember, sometimes we lost games, and all the abuse. You sit back and you think, wow, well, I'm actually devastated. But the fact is, I held my head up high, and that's the main thing. Yeah, in the 90s, I actually managed a team, Leeds Road TRA, and it was just basically players just come from all walks of life, from the street, to play this team. It was based down at Leeds Road. It was a really good team. We had some players that could play, really good, talented footballers, and they did really well when I took over at first. Everything was going smooth. It was always hard for team selection, because there was that many players that was good that could get in the team, and then you had players who knew they were really good but didn't want to put the work in. And my way of running that was, you train, you come and show train. I don't care if you're the best player in the team. If you don't train, you're not playing. And it was as simple as that. And that's how it was for me. And, there were players that came there but wasn't half as good as some players, but they would give you 100% and a hearty response from playing, and just for the love of playing the game. And those players got a fair chance, Like I said, I played many times and many weeks. I had to play with a weakened side because of discipline. And I think in that era, it was his own disciplines that let the team down itself, because I think I got them promoted 3 seasons running on consecutive, and they could have won a lot more, but the ill discipline is what cost us, cost us the place in the league as well, stripped of points and things like that and fines, and it just come to the head where the team practically folded, which was a shame, because they were a really good team, they were a good set of lads. On the day, they beat anybody, if they kept the discipline. But like I said, it was mainly the discipline that let that team down. The main reasons TRA was losing the discipline on the pitch, basically, we were being cheated. Referees was leaning to other sides, and it's simple as that. I can't say it any other way. The truth is, that's what caused it. If it was a 50-50, you could guarantee it's going against us. So basically, TRA was up against referees, right? And it was 70-30. So that's the only decision we got. If it was 70% our way, we'd get it. 30%, no, the decision would go. So we were always fighting against the odds, playing every game. And basically for players and some of the proud players that played in that team, it was awful for them. You've got to put up with it in the streets, everywhere you're going. You go out on the nights and things like that, and you're putting up with it there, and then you're playing a sport that you love in a proper league, and you're being cheated blatantly in front of your own face, and there's nothing you can do. The only thing you can do is going that extra bit hard. And the minute we did that as well, that was it. Players sent off, things like that. Getting fines unnecessarily because the referee was lean. Well, basically, not referee. Referee was cheating. That's the long and short. Basically, the discipline that I grew up under, it was really hard. I mean, I couldn't count the hidings I got off me mum, because my mum was like the main discipline in the house. What she says actually went. So when my mother used to deal with it all the time, and I used to always get the clips from my mum. But the one thing I always remember, if my mother ever told me, I'm going to tell your dad, that's when all the alarms bells rang. And believe you me, right, all the hidings I had off my dad, I can count on one hand. But every one of them, I can remember it like yesterday. So basically, I remember discipline, it's like, if I was told I couldn't go out, I couldn't go out. And if I did something wrong, I had to stay home. Some of my friends got away with it. The one thing that I've always remembered all my life, is a quick one. I had a bit of a disagreement with a certain friend of mine, and all this disagreement started over sports. And basically, I've gone home one day, after me and this person has been battling for a long, long time. Every time we saw each other, we were battling all the time. And it got to the stage where it was getting ridiculous. We were bruising each other up badly. So I've gone home one day, my dad's pulled me aside, and he says to me, have you been fighting? Now, I'm oblivious to what he actually meant, because fighting was just something that we did. But he obviously knew something that I didn't know that he knew. And he then asked me, did I know a certain person? And I said, yes, Dad. He says, well, let me tell you straight. I've been in this country far too long. I know this man. He's a bad man, and so am I. You have to stop this now. It ends here and now. And the same time I got that little drilling, my partner in crime, who I'd been fighting with, was getting the same drilling from his dad at the same time. And ever since then, we became the best of friends, and we have never ever had a crossword between us since. And that's how we did it in the olden days. Our parents stepped in and put a stop to the nonsense straight away. You know, it's like I said, he's known him as a friend. Why should two big men fall out because of a feud, because of the kids? They decided that's not happening. My friendship is worth more. I can talk to this person, and from that day, that problem was solved. Today now, it's just like a running battle. Parents don't seem to have the control as much, let alone they don't say, the kids, right, don't really listen to the parents as much. I don't know why it is, but they just don't seem to listen to the parents. And it causes a lot of animosity amongst people by doing that, because if I felt for 1 minute my son or any of my kids had a problem, the first thing my instincts would kick in: do I know these people? Can I go and see them? Can I try and sort it out? I would try to do that, but sometimes it's a little more difficult. It's a lot easier said than done, and that's what the problem is today. You know, people don't contact each other and try to find a solution. You know, it's no good trying to fix something when it's broke, just as well as it's no good trying to stop the horse once it's bolted. It's no good trying to close the gate once it's bolted. It's gone. The only thing I would say, you know, as a people, we need unity. We need to do more things together, get our businesses out there to flourish, you know, which is basically you got to support one another a bit more. You know, this with all this segregation and all the crime and all those kind of things that we get tarred with and things like that, it just needs to change. You know, you've got knife crimes going on, gun crimes going on. Those things, that's not us, that's not our way. Basically, you need to come away from that. Until you come away from that, we're never going to prosper, we're never going to progress. Well, the local authority, I see one thing. As I grew up in, talk about, say, the 70s, you know, just in the early 70s and that age group there, we had youth clubs where we could go, and we could go, you know, a couple of days a week. We were allowed to go to the youth club, and there was more things that were going. Now it's changed. You know, you don't have no youth clubs. The youths of today, there's nowhere for them to go. You know, they used to do like outings, advanced trips and things like that, you know, Holyhead and things like that. I don't see nothing of those things going on anymore in the schools. You know, they've got these after school clubs as well, where, you know, the 6 weeks and things. It's not active because there's nothing being done for them. So really, they're missing out on a lot. Sports and things now, everything's about health and safety. This, you can't do this because of health and safety. Then on top of that now, you get the average kid these days, they go to school, they come home from school, this segregation. You see, as I grew up, as a family, when we came home from school, we used to sit down and have a meal at the same time. You know, especially on a Sunday, we all sat down at the table and we all ate together, right? I always remember my mum. I remember her telling me I wanted something to eat and I didn't want what was being cooked. My mother told me straight, cook one pot, and it's as simple as that. Even I could read between the lines. She's not cooking 2 and 3 different meals in a day. We're going to cook one meal, we sit down as a family. Nowadays, you don't see that because there's that many takeaways. People live off takeaways. They're eating out the ordinary. They take the food upstairs into the bedroom and they're on the computer and all that, with TVs in the bedroom and things like that. And all that does is breed segregation. Message I give young people today, don't get caught in a trap. Do what you need to do to get by and just try to be happy, you know. You know, whatever you do, at some point you've got to make a sacrifice. And if you've got to make a sacrifice and it's for the sake of the family or whatever, that's what I would do, make a sacrifice.